Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ushanka Digest, a collection of my previous videos covering the same topic. This Ushanka Digest about religion in the Soviet Union. Enjoy the show.
Today I would like to touch the topic about religion in Soviet Union. As I mentioned many times before, I was born in 1971, so it was towards the end of life of the Soviet Union. And in the 20 years that I spent in the USSR, I was a classic example of how the people in the late Soviet Union were relating to religion. For example, my parents weren't religious. Like, we never attended church. We didn't have icons in our house or Bible. I was, everything that a Soviet kid is supposed to be, a member of a young communist and Oktyabryonak and everything else. But at the same time, my parents baptized me when I was born. So I had a godfather and godmother. But besides being baptized, nothing else happened. And as I said, my parents weren't religious, although my mom, as older she gets, she kind of became interested somewhat in religion. At least she mentions God and Jesus way more often than I remember. But otherwise, me and most of my friends, I don't remember anyone who was openly religious person practicing any kind of religion. Of course, in European part of Soviet Union, main official religion was, I won't say official because church and the state was separated, but it was a Russian Orthodox church dominating Ukraine and Belarus and Russia. But as I said, I never wore a cross. A lot of people that true believers, is one of the things they're supposed to do, it to wear on their neck a cross. If you have money, wear a golden cross. Otherwise, it can be a silver cross or made out of cheap metal. And generally, government was quite tolerant towards the religion in late 70s and 80s, but of course it wasn't happening like that in the beginning. Right after revolution in October of 1917, as once again, as I was mentioning that before, I think the Soviet leaders were way over optimistic about fighting against religion in the country. I guess the idea was that people are ready to ditch the religion. All you need to do is just rip that eye patch of their from their faces, and they will see what's going on. So there was a quite intense destruction of churches all over the country. Just in Moscow, after 1917, so in 1920s and 30s, before beginning of World War II, just in Moscow itself, around 400 churches were destroyed or converted or some other type of usage. In Kiev, in my hometown, a total of 12 churches were blown up in 1930s. In my village that I mention all the time, in the northern Ukraine, the church was converted into the so-called club. So those like people would come in and watch movies or do some kind of gatherings. So it was taken away from the church. They pulled the cross off the roof. I remember my grandma was even, it's late 70s. She still remembered how horrified the whole village was, how peasants were upset watching these strangers that came from out of our town, from somewhere else, like Soviet soldiers, and they just tied up the rope to the cross on the top of the church, and then using horses they pull it off. And I think she said some local guy was helping, and then later on he died in some weird farming accident, and they were saying that he got cursed because he helped to destroy the church. In my father's village, I believe they converted the church into a warehouse for the collective farms to store grains and stuff. So there was a quite almost like a terror going against the religion in the Soviet Union in the early years. There were exploding churches. They were taking bells and crosses and melt into metal to use for other purposes. And Comrade Lenin, that's what he said was, we must fight religion. It's the basic of materialism and consequentially Marxism. So religion is our enemy. So they went really hard after church after October 1917. For example, in the famous Decret о земле, so decree about the land, they confiscated all the church properties and land and transferred it to the government. And then also they next law in 1918, they made separation between church and the state, because prior, during the Tsar government, Tsar ruling, church was a state institution. It was a part of the government. And regular peasants, what I recall from the stories from my grandma and my grandfather, they were kind of skeptical. They were religious. Peasants were religious people, but they were also quite skeptical about priests. So there were a lot of humor and jokes, anecdotes going on about priests, messing around with other women, being lazy. And I remember the one story was quite interesting. Prior, people couldn't give their kids names, like you can't choose the name. It was a job of the local priest, Pope, as they call it in Russia. So when you had a kid, and then you bring him to church to get him baptized, and the priest would be the guy who would pick the name for a kid. And it would depend on donations. So, peasants, I don't know if they could bring money, but they will bring, chickens, honey, whatever they have, grains. And depending if they bring quite a generous gift, then a priest will give a kid a good name. But otherwise, if people are poor, then he can pick some, I guess even back then, there were some ugly names that no one wanted to have. And I remember my grandma was telling me the story that they had a guy in their village that priest wasn't happy with donation, so he gave him a name Homa, which was horrible name, and he always hated it. Kids were making fun of him, and she said that when the war started with Germany, he of course got drafted as everyone else, all the males, and he just went right into the bullets. Like he wanted just to get killed. Like they always thought he wanted to commit suicide because she just hated his name so much, and he got instantly killed. So that was a kind of sad story. So people weren't big fans of religion, but at the same time, what the Soviets did was also, they were really upset about it, how they took away their churches, and then a lot of priests were sent to Siberia or just shot. So that was a pretty cruel start of the war against religion in Soviet Union. And of course, if you part of the some kind of management in 30s and 40s under Stalin regime, you could get quite in trouble if they find out that the party member also is a religious person. And I remember one story, I don't recall, not sure, I think it's not a made up story, but it goes that a guy who was a председатель колхоза, so he was a manager of the collective farm, but he was secretly a religious person. So every morning when he gets ready to go to work, right before he steps out of the door, he'll cross himself. That's what Russian Orthodox people do. You touch your forehead, then you touch your kind of like abdomen area, then you touch your left shoulder and right shoulder. So you kind of like cross yourself. And a neighbor noticed that, I guess through the window, or maybe he did outside, and he reported to NKVD, so that's like a secret police, that our manager is actually a secretly religious person. He crosses himself. And the story goes that he got arrested, and they were questioning him like, why are you crossing yourself? And the story goes that the guy said, well, it's totally ridiculous. I don't cross myself because I'm a communist. Before I go step out of the door, I touch my head to think, did I do everything? Do I ready for my work day? Then I touch my stomach to make sure that I ate my breakfast. Then I touch my left shoulder to feel that I have my bilet, so the book that I'm, Communist Party book that you keep at the left shoulder, and there was the other something that I kept in my other pocket. So he kind of made this story that he's actually checking himself, that he's ready to do his duty as a manager of collective farm, and they let him go. But I'm not sure is it real or not, but it sounds pretty funny. So people who were in government, of course, they couldn't be religious people and practice religion in the Soviet Union. Things changed quite a bit when the war started with Germany in 1941, and the Soviet Union was not doing really good. As you know, 1941 and most of 1942 was pretty bad for the Soviet Union. Germans were moving in and they occupied quite a lot bit of the country. So Stalin and his government did a real 180 about this whole attitude to the history of Russia and also about religion. And they realized that a lot of people didn't really care about fighting for the Soviet government, Soviet regime, but they would fight Germans for motherland, for Russia or for Ukraine, or even they fight against people who have opposite religion. So a lot of things were changed, like they started mentioning that we're fighting for motherland, and they introduced even awards like Suvorov's Orden. So there was a new medal with the Suvorov, who was a famous military leader during the Tsar era way back then. So government started kind of using history that before they were kind of ignoring of history of Russia, and also they started using church, and they actually gathered a bunch of church members, like the church management, I want to say, priests, for making an agreement to work together with the church about kind of getting people going and fighting Germans. So war kind of changed the attitude of the Soviet government towards religion. Instead of fighting it, they realized that it will work better if they kind of utilize religion along with other things to actually help to organize people and rule people. After the death of Stalin, Khrushchev kind of renewed the attacks against religion. And one of the things I remember, my mother told me the story that some people would attend churches on Sundays, but teachers would wait by the church and beg parents not to take kids into church because the teacher will get in trouble. So the teachers on Sundays will come to church, by the church, and they will offer free babysitting, pretty much, like, let me have your kids, we'll go for a walk, or we'll study or learn something. Just please don't take your kids into the church, because if the government find out that my pupils attend in church, I could lose a job or get in trouble. So that's what was going in the village when my grandparents, they had teachers on Sundays coming by the church and taking kids from parents. And of course, since it's a small village, everyone knows everyone, so their parents felt bad, and they will let the kids go themselves into church. As I said, my grandparents really didn't go to church. And when you're peasant, a lot of times it's really impossible to attend church on Sundays, because cows don't really care is it Sunday or Tuesday. Cows need to be fed and milked, twice a day, no matter what day it is. You gotta feed chickens, you gotta feed your pigs. So my grandma, for example, she did all the work like on Sunday as every other day, except she would never sew anything. Like she wouldn't touch the needle. So that was her thing for Sundays. She does all the work they needed. She maybe kind of ignored the garden, but she will take care of the animals, but she won't sew anything. There was because they constantly had to fix holes and stuff like that, but she won't touch the needle on Sundays because there was a kind of like against the rules. You don't do that on Sunday. Another interesting detail about religion out in the country among peasants, like every house in the village had an icon in every room. So for example, if my grandparents had a 2-room house, that log cabin, and every room had its icon in I would say in our case it was a top left corner, so that'll be southwest corner, and I'm not sure what it was location based on, but other houses I recall, I guess it will be up to owners, but that was the thing, like if you build a new house, you purchase an icon at the church, and then you invite priest and you pay him money or donate goods again, and he will bless your new home with holy water. So he will sprinkle holy water, and then they will bring the icon, and it kind of dedicate the icon to this house, so the saints will be protecting this house from fire and other troubles. So every home I remember that I walked in that village, they always had an icon in the corner, up high by the ceiling, and it will have this special handmade kind of like rugs or something. They call them towels, but it's a special towels that is sewn by hand and they decorated by hand, and that will be in the corner, and you never touch it. It just stays there. And religious people, when they come in the house, they will cross themselves looking at the icon. So that was interesting kind of detail. And my grandparents, later, I was kind of naughty when they passed away. I was very curious, so I actually took the icon down and I took it apart. I thought maybe it's like some old, rare, expensive icon, but it was made in 1909 or something, Odessa, and it looks like it was just kind of like mass manufactured icon product. So I was kind of disappointed. So I put it all together and put it back in the corner. But some people had really old, expensive, rare icons. So later in the 90s, it was a big thing about people were breaking into these old houses and stealing icons to resell. Another thing I would say that I'm proud about the Soviet people, that those religious holidays like Easter or Christmas, they actually were religious holidays. Like people went to church, and not all of them, but who was religious and they felt it's important, they actually went to church for Easter, they went to church for Christmas. Like there was no shopping whatsoever for Christmas in Soviet Union. It was strictly religious holiday. People go to church for all night, and it'd be all night just singing, walking around the church, doing all this their magic stuff that I don't understand. Same for the Easter. We will boil eggs and we color them, and of course you couldn't just purchase some egg colorings like here. People usually peel the onions skin, and it makes eggs nice and brown. So that was mostly the colors of the eggs in Ukraine, at least just the brown eggs. And then they bake that special sweet bread with raisins, pascha, and you take all that stuff to church and to have it sprinkled with holy water. So this is kind of cool. That I really not happy about American being Christmas just pretty much just commercialized. It's all about sales. Religious is like gone completely. It's just hollow. In Soviet Union, that was a real deal. And I remember from when I was a kid, there was one holiday in the middle of the summer, and I just, for some reason, just cannot recall the name of it. But Grandma would send me to the river to collect yar. So there was this plant growing along the river banks, and like your house is supposed to be green. And I'm not sure if it's like more like a Russian Orthodox holiday, like celebration, or something more like back to the pagans days. But I'll bring a bunch of that yar into the house, and my grandma will spread on the floor everywhere. So that was so-called green holiday. And I don't think that there'll be anything going on in church, but that was a big deal. And of course, there was constantly, she would mention, today is a such and such saint day. And like in August, there was a Saint Ilya day. And I was saying that after that day, you're not supposed to swim because water is too cold. So they even had the saying, Ilya kupаться нельзя. So after Ilya holiday, there is no more swimming in the river. But of course, us being kids was like, yeah, whatever, we're going swimming. And I mentioned that, the Soviet government gave really hard time to the Russian Orthodox Church, but other churches, other religions had even a harder time, like Catholics, Muslims, Judaism, all those people, those churches had even worse. For example, when Soviet Union took over Western Ukraine and joined it to the rest of the Ukrainian territory, there was a lot of Catholic people there and some other religions, and they pretty much like made them illegal. Like you can only be Russian Orthodox, that's the only official religion was allowed to exist, otherwise you weren't allowed to practice anything. And in Kiev, like my personal experience, I visited several times when I was a kid. There was this theater called Kukalny Theater. It's like downtown Kiev. And I never knew that originally that theater was actually a synagogue. But they confiscated it and it turned into a children's theater. So, you have those little like dolls that people yank the tiny ropes and the dolls perform. So this Kukalny Theater, downtown Kiev, that I visited many times, I never knew that it was a synagogue. And only after collapse of the Soviet Union, they actually gave it back to the Jewish people, and there is a synagogue in there again. And I actually, a couple of years ago, I went in there. I met a guy, a Jewish person from Kharkov, who runs a dating service. So he provides, helps Americans and Germans and other people, men that are looking for Ukrainian women. He runs a dating service, and as I said, we did an interview with him once. I posted on YouTube. So when he knew that I come into Kiev, he said, let's meet, and he invited me. We met by the synagogue, and now you can also have a little restaurant there, so you can have some kosher food. So I had a meal with him there, had a good time. And of course, in the beginning of the 90s, when the Soviet Union was no more, it was a giant, like huge revival of religion. It became like actually quite fashionable, stylish thing to have a cross, wear the cross. People who buy new cars would go to the church and pay the priest to have them blessed with holy water, which, for me, is just totally ridiculous thing to even can imagine. But that would be, you just see this, rich-looking guys with a black Mercedes and have a priest walking around and carefully splashing it with the holy water. Churches were transferred back to the church. So, for example, that club in our village, he was given back to the church, and they opened it again. They sent a priest, but shortly they closed it again because the village shrunk so much that wasn't enough people to support the church. And they don't have this like 10% dealio that you make $100 to give $10 to the church. People just bring donations, whatever they have, so it's hard to support the church if you have only a small congregation. So it was a short-lived church, so it was open for a year or two, and then priest left because he's like, I can't survive on this. And there's just empty building, but it officially belongs to the church now. Also, there's quite a few churches that got destroyed completely, like they got blown up. They found the old prints from way back when it was constructed, and using those prints, they built a brand new church that looked exactly like old one. They did that in Kiev. In Podol, there was an old church that got destroyed, and now it rebuilt. And also in Moscow, I'm gonna make a separate video about it, but there was a big famous Jesus the Savior church that got destroyed in 1931, and it got rebuilt again in 1995 on exactly the same location. And that kids theater, as I said, is back a synagogue now. So it's kind of like, in your wall clock, the pendulum, it was swinging one way and now it's swinging all the way back. And of course right now in Russia, church is playing a huge part in the lives of people, and unfortunately a lot of it doesn't look good. Like they strong supporters of Putin, which is whatever, and they have a fancy yacht, and then they live like luxury life, the main top priests. And for me it just doesn't look good. They like golden decorations and other stuff. So these poor old grandmas, they bring in all they have to donate to the church, and then you see this main patriarch on this big fancy boat, and flying on a helicopter, driving Mercedeses. So as I said, I'm a very skeptical person when it comes to religion, and it makes me just sad to see that after so many years of struggle, of course it was way overboard how hard they fought against religion, but now it's like it came all the way back and even further back into this, like when the church is pretty much plays quite important part as a state institution almost, although it's supposed to be separate. Okay, so this is my story about religion in the Soviet Union. I hope you enjoyed the show. As always, please don't forget to like this video. I'm always interested to see your comments, so please, if you have any interesting stories or any questions, please post them under this video. I'm trying to answer them, or at least write them down so I can make a new video about it. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon. Good morning again, comrades. And now we're in downtown Zhoved, the village that I spend every summer in 70s and 80s. As you see, it's 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, and not much going on. White building behind the monument is our local grocery store. I don't think we have a single customer right now, but we will be looking at this building. So this is the church, which now is closed because there was not enough people in this village to support the priest. So there was a church originally before revolution. After the revolution, they knocked the cross down and took away this building from the Russian Orthodox Church, and for many years it was a club. So there was a movie theater, they had a pool table, they had meetings there, and I went here quite often during my summer break to watch movies. So now it's transferred back to the church properties, but they didn't have it open for too long because there was not enough people to donate money to support a full-time priest. And here we have a monument to the fallen soldiers during the World War II. It looks like this village was freed from Germans in September 24, 1943. So this grave contains 21, there's a list of 21 soldiers and one major that died, and also 68 unknown soldiers. Which is kind of interesting because, you know, when you retreat and you lose soldiers, they could become unknown because you left them behind. But if you move forward, I don't understand how the soldiers could be unknown. But this is another monument to the fallen soldiers during the World War II Great Patriotic War. And this is like a standard monument. I think they probably made them in tens of or hundreds of thousands because I see a similar design all over the country. Back in the good old Soviet days, store at the left, that was a grocery actually store. And this on the right was so-called Selmag. So on the left was Selpo, on the right was Selmag. So that was selling, you know, clothing, shoes, whatever items of everyday use. And that's where I spent a lot of hours waiting in line to buy bread. That was a really basic selection of grocery items. Salt was in the bags, sugars was sold from the bags, maybe a couple options of cigarettes, a couple of options of vodka, bread when it's available, and a lot of canned fish. We never had shortage of canned fish. But otherwise, all through the 80s, it was really bare. And I remember a lady told me that usually they sold about 500 rubles worth of goods in this store, a hardware shop. New addition to our downtown is that little playground. Apparently some guy was trying to get elected, so he donated money and he planted. They've installed similar playgrounds in several villages around here, but he lost anyways. So our village actually has two monuments dedicated to the soldiers, fallen soldiers of World War II. This one is dedicated to the local villagers that didn't come back. So our village wasn't that small, wasn't that big either, but we lost a lot of people in the war. So there's a 9. Wow, I'm bad with math today too. So we got 4 and 4, 8. So 10 boards pretty much filled with names. So that's the local men that never came back from war. So as you see, Soviet government haven't spent a lot of money on these monuments, but they didn't do much to support actual veterans that survived the war. This house sits abandoned for a long time. I remember taking pictures of this house probably about 10 years ago. It was already abandoned, and it's right downtown. There's a club. Now its club is there, village club. And no one is interested. Actually, it looks like roof is in really good shape, but logs probably getting bad. And right here next to it is the cellar. So that's how the usually cellars were built, like a little separate item building. And this is our shuttered post office. This is the building I came to pick up my parcels with bananas. If you listen to my story about bananas in the village, this is the place I came to pick it up. They actually even cut out power already. Wow. So they're trying to figure out how to save money with the villages dying out. So they decided it's too expensive to have a full-time post office person. So now it's closed, and I think it's open once a week for a couple of hours, something like that. I'm not positive because there is no more. No, powers go behind. Never mind. There are outside lights removed, but power's still there. I think it opens once a week for a couple of hours for people to get pensions. So it creates huge line even in this small village. Just like in Ushanka, this is Soviet era mailbox. Soviet symbol removed. In Russian letters, Pochta.
repainted in Ukrainian style poshta. So you can still, you know, it's kind of like ironic. You can still feel it, you can see still the letters, Russian letters going through it. Here you also schedule when they usually pick up stuff, but they erase it since there's no more mail being picked up out of this, and an access door. And if you love my channel and would like to show your support, please click on the link below this video and become the patron of the Ushanka Show. For as little as $1, you can help us grow and create the new, interesting videos about the life in Soviet Union.
One more time, the topic of religion in Soviet Union and how the Soviet government was fighting the religion. And specifically, I would like to talk about one interesting story about the church in Moscow. As I mentioned in my previous video, during the Soviet regime, especially in the beginning, during the Stalin rule, thousands and thousands of churches were destroyed or repurposed. And one church has quite an interesting history, so today we'll talk about it. There is a beautiful church in Moscow, the capital of Russia. It's called the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, which is the tallest Orthodox Christian church in the world at 338 feet. Beautiful church, but you will never guess, if you didn't know the history of this church, that this cathedral disappeared for over 60 years, and now he's back at its glory and dominating downtown Moscow, but for over 60 years it wasn't there. So what actually happened? The idea of this church started under Tsar Alexander I, right after the War of 1812, when France attacked Russia, and there was a really horrible war for both sides. If you remember the history, Napoleon took Moscow, Then he had to abandon Moscow and struggle through the winter back to Europe, and he lost almost all his army. Of course, Russians lost a lot of people too, soldiers and officers, so it was decided to build a beautiful church and dedicate it to the fallen soldiers and officers that perished in the War of 1812 and also other wars. There were several designs, and an interesting moment that the church design actually was one from 20-year-old Karl Wittberg, who even wasn't actually architect. He was Mason, and by religion he was Lutheran. So in order to get his design accepted, like the Tsar Alexander I liked that the best, he had to get baptized into Russian Orthodox Church, and only after that he got accepted. As I said, it was a mega project, and especially considering it's 1800s. The total cost was 16 million rubles. It's even hard to say how much money in modern cash, but it's probably pushing billions. So 16 million rubles, that's what government paid. Plus there were a lot of donations from regular people and from tradesmen and other people. It was quite a different design, definitely not the classical look of the Russian churches, and construction took more than 40 years, from 1839 till 1883. At that time, a lot of things changed, including the Tsar, so the construction started under Alexander I and continued when Nikolai I became a Tsar in 1825. So when Nikolai I became a Tsar, the construction was stopped. Apparently, Karl Wittberg was a good, talented person to create this beautiful design, but he wasn't really good about running the project. There was a huge overspending, and he got arrested and sent to Siberia for overspending the money, around 1 million rubles. And in the same time, Nikolai I, he was more like traditional Russian Tsar, so he didn't like the design, and so it was cancelled. And then the new design was created, and there was more in like Russian Byzantine style. So there was a massive tall church looking more as standard Russian churches, and since 1883 it was in service. When the revolution happened in 1917 and the Soviet government separated the church from the state, the church financing stopped also, but they managed to get financing and support the church and asking people for donations. So since 1917 till 1930s, church was operated like normal churches do now, just based on people donations. A small interesting detail, during the construction in 1830s, they, besides changing design, they also changed the location where the church supposed to be, and they took down, in order to clear the space, there was a female monastery called Alexeyevsky Zhensky Monastery, and the lady who ran that monastery, she was really upset, and apparently she put a bad omen on the builders, and she predicted that this place will be empty, which is quite bizarre if, thinking about what happened in the end of this church. So this lady actually put the bad omen on the church, and bad things happened in 1931. In July of 1931, Soviet government made a decision to build this new monumental Dom Sovetov, which is like the House of Soviets. So Soviet, it's like a government of Soviet Union, we call Soviet Union, so it's a union of Soviets. And Soviets is like when people gather together and discuss things, so it's a Soviet. So they decided to build this new monumental Dvorets Sovetov, and location was chosen right where the Cathedral of Christ the Savior was located. And of course, during that time, no one cared about the opinion of people, opinion of church. So they decided to destroy the church and clear up the space for this new massive building. For several months, they were trying to take it apart, but since it was a huge building, it was taking forever. So on December 5th, 1931, they did a controlled demolition. Actually, 2 of those, because first one didn't do much damage, and only after second one they managed it to collapse. And construction began in 1937 for the Dvorets Sovetov, actually not Dom Sovetov, Dvorets, the palace of the Soviets, began in 1937. Well, I hope you enjoy my show. As always, don't forget to put likes under this video, share with your friends, and we'll talk to you soon.
Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи! В эфире программа Ushanka Show. Today we're gonna read and discuss another chapter of the declassified KGB report from July 26, 1976. This document was discovered by the Ukrainian historian Eduard Andryushenko. He has his own YouTube channel called KGB Files, and I will provide the link below this video. Initially, I was planning to make just one video about this document, but my attention to detail and some natural curiosity made it way longer, so that'll be video number 3. In my video, American Spies Report, we talked about KGB chasing 2 US diplomats in Ukrainian city of Cherkasy, where they were hanging around some tank division there. And I have another video about Photography USA exposition of 1976, which happened in Kiev, and this report covered that issue, as well as Moscow, Leningrad, and other large cities of the Soviet Union. And I just have to tell you that I'm very proud of my discovery about the famous American Polaroid guy. So that's the guy who was taking Polaroid pictures during this exhibition and giving away the photos. So people in different cities mentioned the long-hair Polaroid guy, and his name was John Bierly from Muskegon, Michigan. And I discovered that later on he became an ambassador of the United States in Russia for quite a few years, like 1991, 1998. Then there was a comment from one of my viewers who lives in Muskegon, Michigan, and he mentioned something else extremely interesting about John, about his father. His nickname is Jumpin' Joe, but I'll make a separate video on that topic. And now we're returning to our KGB document, and we're going to read the chapter called Foreigners' Visit of the House of Prayers in Kiev. So here we go. Kiev. On July 19, 1976. And you know, it's so interesting because I was there. Not in Kiev, because in the summer I spent my time in the village. But on July 19, 1976, I just turned 5 days prior. So that's pretty cool. So on July 19, 1976, the city of Kiev was visited by the Brastings couple. So that's a husband and wife, the guests of United States Embassy in the Soviet Union. So pretty important couple. They were escorted by R. Porter, unfortunately I don't know his first name, a manager of so-called advanced group of U.S. consulate in Kiev. So Moscow had the main embassy, United States Embassy, and Kiev just had a consulate, and this guy worked there. And I love this next sentence. Mr. Porter is a CIA agent. It's just amazing. Meanwhile, Mr. Brasting is a pastor of Dutch Reformed Church and knows many church personalities. They use the word авторитеты, like influencers in the USSR. And I looked it up, so Dutch Reformed Church, it's kind of interesting, I never knew about it, but it's a pretty large church here in the United States. The foreigners visited Seventh-day Adventist prayer house, so not church, but prayer house, located at Yamskaya Street 70. And here I need to pause and say thank you to Google, because in less than a minute I just entered the address in Russian, Yamskaya Street 70, Kiev, and sure enough, now there is a Seventh-day Adventist church, quite a beautiful building. So sometimes after 1991, they took down the house and built a real big church. Okay, so back to the document. During the conversation with Seventh-day Adventist pastor, SDA, Mr. Porter, that CIA agent, presented himself as the United States consul in Kiev and informed the pastor that he is planning now to visit services regularly. So it sounds like he was there for the very first time, and he got interested to visit that house of prayers. And what else is interesting, that KGB report somehow knew what was going on during the conversation. So they were, eavesdropping or something. I find it quite curious that they knew what conversation is about. So once again, it's 1976, Cold War in full bloom. And then next sentence says, the pastor handed Mr. Porter a requested address list of all prayer homes of Baptists and Adventists in Kiev and their schedule of work. So once again, how did they know that? But somehow first of all, he requested that address list, and the list was already to go. So this whole thing is quite curious. And the next sentence, KGB mentions that оперативным путем, so by some operative means, which is eavesdropping, or they had, not sure how they managed to knew about the conversation, but during the conversation between Pastor Brastings, so this guy of the Dutch Reformed Church, and Mr. Porter, the CIA agent, Mr. Porter mentioned that Exhibition Photography USA that was going on in Kiev at that time played a big role in making an impression on the Soviet people, especially youth. Thousands of Russians, which is, especially if you talk about if it's exhibition going on in Ukraine, it was probably thousands of Ukrainians, or at least you could say Soviets, but he said thousands of Russians visited the exposition and learned about the United States. Conversations with youth, it's a great opportunity, a great benefit for us, said Porter. Moscow office of KGB got a similar report. So that's quite an interesting report. I mean, I learned for myself that we already had Seventh-day Adventist prayer houses, not churches, but at least prayer houses back in the 70s in Kiev. I had no idea. Of course, now they spread all over. If you Google SDA church in Kiev, Ukraine, they like mushrooms after the rain all over the Kiev and the neighboring little towns. So I'm not sure how many Adventists now in Ukraine, but definitely quite a few. And while we're on the topic of Seventh-day Adventists, I want to mention some fact that maybe some of you don't know. If you remember Boris Nemtsov, a guy, he was a Russian politician, opposition politician that got killed right by the Kremlin wall. His sister is apparently one of the big wigs in Seventh-day Adventist movement in Russia, and that was the reason why SDA people didn't have a lot of trouble in Russia, since they have a krysha, as we call it in Russian, high-placed politician that was kind of protecting their interests. So after he was killed, there was a lot of panic among the Seventh-day Adventists that maybe Putin will start shutting down their operations in Russia. Because SDA even has a university in Russia. It's located in Zaoksky. And I know those things because I live in Berrien Springs, Michigan, which is like SDA capital of the world. And half of the town, if not more, are Seventh-day Adventists. So that's a well-known fact. Anyway, it's all I have for you today. I hope you learned something new. As always, don't forget to like this video. Maybe share with your friends. And we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye. Hey, by the way, cool merch for cool comrades is available at the Ushanka store at teespring.com. Just a friendly reminder that my book American Diaries is available on Amazon.com, or shoot me an email if you would like to have a signed copy. Thank you.